Welcome everyone to the Clay Seminars. I'm Linda Sormin, and I'm joining you from NYU, which is located on the unceded land of the Munsee Lenape peoples. I ask you to join me in acknowledging the Munsee Lenape community, their elders both past and present, as well as future generations. New York University acknowledges that it was founded upon exclusions and erasures of many Indigenous peoples, including those on whose land this institution is located. This acknowledgement demonstrates a commitment to beginning the process of working to dismantle the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism. And with me co-hosting today is Clare Twomey.
Hello, I'm calling from London today. The Clay Seminars is a collective gathering formed through the alliance of NYU and the University of Westminster's research team at the Ceramics Research Centre. We are grateful and humbled by the civic opportunity of our educational institutes to support this series, and we invite a broad gathering of artists, curators, and arts organisations at all stages of their practice to join us and share in the seminar series. Hello, everybody. It is fantastic that you've been able to join us today. Wherever you are very, very welcome. Thank you for taking the time and effort to click the link, register, and join us today. And a huge personal thank you to everybody for bolstering my nerve to ask the question, why clay, why now? We've had more than 400 people register to join us in this conversation today, and so grateful to be able to work with Ceramics Research Centre, Linda Sormin, NYU, and to be able to invite the three incredible curators that we have with us today. Now, if you've never joined a webinar before, it's fantastic because it's just like TV, your favorite television, except for there's a fantastic opportunity here that you have a Q&A button at your disposal. So if you want to have a little explore of that now, you can send questions over to us at any point during this seminar. And so as we go through what will be a very quick hour of Zoom world, then please send in your questions as you go. You can send them anonymously. So please feel free to be brave. This is our opportunity to talk openly and open-handedly about questions which are relevant to us all. More than 400 people thinking that this is a jolly good idea to talk about this now. So to make a little introduction, I am Clare Twomey, and I mainly move through the world as an artist. I make large-scale sculptures, monumental sculptures, live works, and where I can, I'm trying to raise quietened voices. And this is all through the work of clay. And it was about 2 years ago, maybe a little longer, where this question of why clay, why now, started to really percolate through to my world. After a couple of decades of working with clay, I have never felt more welcome or more included in the wider visual arts. And this is this moment. There was a key event which really made me consider this more. It was a call out from the Victoria and Albert Museum to work with Tessa Gates with his research, his deep research that he has been able to undertake over the last year. Well, we've seen it enacted in the last year, but as our curators will no doubt tell us today, these thoughts and manifestations through institutes and through their hard work take a lot longer to arrive. But for Tessa Gates, with his multi-venue project, The Question of Clay, running across London, and I will talk very locally because we are coming out the other side of a pandemic. So my view has been from the local, extending out to the global. And this week, of course, Tessa Gates opens his pavilion, Serpentine Pavilion, which is the accumulation of all of this super valuable work that's happened in the last year. But not only that, when invited and installing a work for the Museum of Modern Art in Paris with this exhibition, The Flammes, there was an understanding of a rewriting of a history of clay that was timely and helped us rethink where we thought we were with this material. And so seeing the Bond Street galleries seeping with clay, Christie Brown having her first exhibition on Cork Street, Shawanda Corbett showing work from the the venues out in the mountains in Wales. This last week opening at the Tate Britain, a spectacular exhibition. Then looking outwards, understanding that Linda was working with Susan Cross, who we are so grateful is with us today, on this incredible exhibition at MoCA, a hugely influential venue for the visual arts. And then understanding the work that is happening in Venice, where you turn, there is clay in pot form and beyond. So I felt that this was really a moment to be able to confidently ask, why clay, why now? And so I couldn't think of anybody better to ask than curators, the people who have contributed without doubt to our worlds of clay this year. I'm hugely grateful to have Susan Cross join us from MoCA, who curated the incredible exhibition and is going to respond to us today to the question of why clay, why now? The exhibition titled Ceramics in the Expanded Field. We also have Dr. Jareh, who has taken time out of her hugely busy, busy world, and who curated a really insightful, intelligent, and onward-looking exhibition, Body Vessel Clay, Black Women, Ceramics and Contemporary Art at 2 Temple Place. So we're so grateful to have you with us. And finally, we have Dr. Sequoia Miller, who I'm so pleased to meet after many years of hearing of your hugely valuable work. Dr. Sequoia Miller joins us from the Gardiner Museum, a place very close to my heart that has always challenged clay in many forms from this incredible collection that they sit with. And this week, or next week, Sequoia, you can help me with that, opening a new work, Talking Earth, which is a large public work. And so for the next 5 minutes each, our curators will be able to tell us how they have responded to this provocation of why clay, why now? And then we will move into a discussion. Zoom world discussions tend to be slightly clunky, so please forgive us because we don't have that beautiful overlaying of being human. We have portals of being human. So we will raise up some questions between us, and then we will move to looking at the questions that you, our hugely valuable participants, can offer us, and we will answer those in the best way possible. So now, Susan, if it is okay to move to you, I would ask you to give us your response to the tricky old question, why clay, why now?
Thank you, Claire. Thank you so much for including me on this panel. I'm sure that I'm going to learn a lot today. So I'm approaching this question really with my exhibition, Ceramics in the Expanded Field, in mind, and hopefully the background will be showing some install images of the exhibition. Why clay, why now? I mean, I was thinking about that 10 to 12 years ago when it felt like an epiphany, but it was probably slower than that, when I was seeing all the, the major galleries in Chelsea and beyond showing clay work, ceramics, and even adding artists working in clay to their stables. Before, I felt like I'd seen Betty Woodman and Peter Volkos and Ken Price, but there was sort of a limited view on clay work and ceramics, at least in the US and New England and in major museums and galleries. But that seemed to be changing, and not only were ceramic artists joining those galleries that had before been focusing on sculpture and painting. Sorry, someone sent me a little note, so I stalled. Also, there are artists in the stable who weren't usually working in clay, started to experiment with it, or maybe got brave enough to bring it out from, working in their studio with it, because as we know, for hundreds and hundreds of years, artists have been working with clay in different stages. So I'm really responding to what was going on. And in fact, I was thinking about this show, looking to the 10th anniversary of Dirt on Delight, an important show that was at the ICA Philadelphia, a contemporary Kunsthalle like MoCA. And so I wanted to kind of take the pulse 10 years out and I could also offer artists something that is particular to Mass MoCA, which is a lot of space, and artists who already were working on large scale could do their best work here, and also artists who had never been given a chance to work on a larger scale could do so here. So it's 8 US-based artists. It's, you know, it's a local regional view. And I could have had so many more artists. Of course, the list was much longer, but in the end, I kept it to 8, including some very local artists. And what I like to do is, with a smaller show, each artist can have more space and a chance to really articulate their practice on its own, and then also in dialogue with other artists. These 8 also come from essentially 2 different generations. One in their, 30s, 40s, who have been fighting this bias that we've all felt about clay for so long, and then a younger generation who I think have had an easier time of it, but interestingly, I think have internalized it. So what I also have done is look at artists who have connections beyond just clay. These 8 artists, like many others, are working in a post-disciplinary way, to use a term that Glenn Adamson used. They use clay in particular works and in their practice with video, printmaking, in my show, neon, performance. This show started with a lot of performance and includes that in it. So there's a lot of hybridity. And then also what connects these artists is an interest in the social and political and cultural histories in clay and the objects it creates, and looking at how clay can tell us about histories, both ones that have been silenced and also ones that have been tied to systems of oppression. And what I've noticed too, a lot of these works are new, so I was processing it as it was going up, but I realized that a lot of these artists use fragments, and whether implicitly or explicitly, they're really looking at fragments as a way to break down the conditions as they are in the world we live in now, to rebuild it, which I think is on all of our minds now, how to change the world that we have now. And I've learned too that ceramic artists are so fun to work with, because breakage is such a part of everyone's practice, and you have to embrace mistakes. I mean, it's such a highly technical medium, and mistakes happen and people embrace it. So it's just, I think why now, to sum it up, is that there's so much potential. Oh, that's my alarm. Everyone has a relationship to clay, from the dishes on our table to those that we are broken on the floor, to the histories that we learn about through historical clay works and pots and architecture. But we can use it to model a new way of living and being. So I'll say more. 5 minutes goes really quickly, but I look forward to talking more and in more detail. So that's my quick summation of why now, which is really a lot also about audience. Why is a larger audience paying attention to clay now? Because it's always been here.
Oh, but that's such a great question, which I don't think we're not going to bump into from the other speakers' responses either, Susan. So thank you so much for starting off. And even though it felt very brief, it gave us a brilliant direction in how you were thinking and responding to the question. And if I can hand over now to Dr. Jareh Dash, that would be fantastic to hear your thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you, everyone who's here joining us today. Can I share my screen? Is that, I mean, I've got like a sort of...
You can.
Okay, I didn't... Okay. Just...
That's great.
Okay. Full screen, yeah, that works. Is that fine? Is that okay? Does that work? Okay, thank you. I guess this question of why clay, why now, really is connected to this exhibition, Body Vessel Clay, Black Women in Ceramics, Contemporary Art, which closed recently in London, but is due to open in New York at the end of this month, actually. And my interest really is rooted in personal interest in ceramics in Nigeria. I'm British Nigerian, and growing up in Nigeria, I was engaging with Ladi Kwali in a very sort of surface way. I knew her name, but I didn't know anything about the interaction she had with Michael Cardew. And this was something that came to me over 10 years ago when I was working in Middlesbrough at the Middlesbrough Institute of Modern Art, working in an institution which has a phenomenal collection of ceramics, really. But I'm very much of a generation looking at the legacies of colonialism, how that relates and traces into the present. Also sort of considering the work of artists who are sort of disrupting the fields of ceramic or thinking of working with clay in a more, I guess, radical and experimental way. But I was just really interested within this exhibition, just really unpacking Ladi Kwali's history, rooting her work in indigenous ceramics in Nigeria, and then the place of Ladi Kwali's legacy today existing between these two histories in Nigeria and Gwari traditions that are very much matrilineal, and in conversation with modernity through her engagements with Cardew, and the hybridity of objects that emerged, functional into decorative, into valuable water vessels and whatnot. And there was also this looming question as I was speaking to people mostly in Nigeria across generations, this absence and presence of Ladi Kwali in terms of in just sort of, I guess, public imagination, achieving all of these things across continents, but then also not, just in terms of engaging with her life and her legacy, just things not really sort of being that prominent. And, as I sort of briefly mentioned, raising this ideas around the postcolonial gender and class perspective on ceramics, and centering on 70 years of this history from the 1950s to the present. I was also very interested in, I guess, the younger generation of Black women specifically, taking up ceramics, turning it into something that sits outside of, I guess, what is traditionally functional objects, into sculpture, into performative objects, through the work of Phoebe Collins-James, Siobhan de Corbett, who are trained ceramicists, but then reimagining the medium anew. Chinasa Vivian Ezuga, Jade Montserrat, really sort of looking more conceptually at clay, where it exists in the landscape, who owns it, who has a right to sort of take up this medium and do and work in it in certain ways. And so it's very much an exhibition in two parts. There's a very historical part of the exhibition that centers around when Ladi Kwali comes to the Pottery Training Center that Michael Cardew set up in Abuja. I wanted to extend that to sort of think of what kinds of objects came out of this center, this introduction of glazing and throwing at the wheel and all of these things. So there's a central display that does that. And then connecting that history to the time that Magdalena Dondo spent in Abuja learning these hand-building Gwari techniques and tracing that into contemporary language of her work today. And really just sort of, I guess, presents a 70-year evolution from this history through these women's work. And then sort of, I guess, beginning again with this idea of clay and performance, or clay as a performative tool, part of a wider interdisciplinary practice with a younger generation of artists. So yeah, that's sort of a summary of what the exhibition was doing, and the kinds of questions that it was trying to raise across two different locations, across different time periods and geographies.
Thank you, Jareh. I think that it's really interesting in even now through this discussion of bringing two sets of curatorial moments into conversation with each other, I can see that there is so much conversation to be had. But before we get to that, if it's okay, Jareh, to move to Sequoia Miller now, then we'll have another perspective to bring, which will be interesting. So thank you so much for sharing what feels like a really personal voice into, I think it's the problem with institutes and the idea of the curator. It all seems at such distance, but you brought us much closer to that, and that's an incredible gift. So I'll hand over to Sequoia Miller now, if that's okay with you.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Jareh and Susan. Great to hear more about both of your projects. And one thing that strikes me right away is some of the overlapping themes. So excited to be able to talk about that. Before we do, I will start sharing. I wanted to speak today actually very narrowly about a particular project that we are working on here at the Gardiner Museum in Toronto, because I think in some ways it kind of illuminates many of the ideas or questions or themes that we have encountered in the first two presentations, and can think about more broadly in terms of ceramics. So what you're looking at here is the entrance to the Gardiner Museum, again, kind of downtown Toronto. And what I'll highlight is this pot that is now at the front of the museum. This is a piece called Talking Earth. It is a public commission that is supported by the City of Toronto, and is the result from a call for submissions that we sent out about a year and a half ago for a work that would be on the plaza in front of the museum that was centered around celebrating and honoring the ongoing Indigenous presence of folks here in North America or on Turtle Island. The work is a contemporary version of a large-scale Mohawk cooking vessel. You can see that it's fragmented, kind of like Susan mentioned. This sort of notion of being able to work with the fragment, I think, is critical. What we can see, though, is that the form of the piece is holding together. And in fact, there's sort of an implication of it coming back together and rejoining. The piece was actually literally just installed on our plaza a day or two ago. So we're still like kind of getting all of the elements together. It has lights, in fact, on the interior that will kind of shine out at nighttime. The work, the commission was awarded to the artist Santi Smith. Santi is an artist, she's a Mohawk artist of the Turtle Clan of the Six Nations of the Grand River. And Santi is both a visual artist and a choreographer. She's a dancer and choreographer, and she has used clay in a number of her works in the past, particularly around this kind of series of sort of site-specific performances that she thinks it calls clay woman or clay women. An integral aspect of the project then is not just the physical object in front of the museum, but the performance that is activating the object. Santi Smith is actually right on the plaza of the museum now, about 20 feet behind me, rehearsing. The performances will be taking place this weekend, starting tomorrow. The kind of world premiere is tomorrow. And the performances and the piece itself really speak to this kind of elemental connection of our bodies to the land and to our presence here, wherever we may be. You can see in the rendering here that the performance will also include projections. So there'll be a projection both on kind of the large sort of window at the front of the museum, as well as onto the form itself. And I think one aspect of that that's important is the connection between the sort of low-tech aspect of ceramics and a kind of high-tech aspect of animation and digital projection. The image that you're seeing on the kind of rendering of the large-scale projection is actually based on a pot that was made by Santi Smith's grandmother. Santi Smith's grandmother was a woman named Elba, or Bun Smith, and Bun Smith is widely known in Canada, particularly for reviving Mohawk ceramics in the 1950s and 1960s. She sort of, well, quite literally pieced together ceramics by finding shards on the Six Nations Reserve and sort of reimagining what ceramics from her people could look like. So you can see a picture on the lower right of Bun Smith holding one of her works in the 1960s. And in fact, the other picture there is Bun Smith presenting one of her pots to Queen Elizabeth. This picture is from 1967. It was taken during the Montreal Expo, which was, of course, the centenary of Canada and sort of a kind of widely celebrated event at the time. And I can't tell you how much I love this picture because it really speaks about like the transmission of knowledge and indigeneity. It speaks about coloniality. And it also speaks to this, to sort of the forms that activism, identity, or we could say survivance also took in the 1960s. And Santi Smith is very consciously building off of this legacy of her grandmother in terms of how she's thinking about the work today. In terms of how this sort of points to this larger question of ceramics now and why now, for me, kind of really the key themes that that both Susan and Jareh pointed out, are again working with this fragment, our kind of near universal connection with ceramics in all forms as people. Again, this kind of combination of the ancient and the high tech, a sort of multidisciplinary or post-disciplinary approach where performance and imagery is often integral. I think also in the case of this Talking Earth project, two other really key aspects are the connection to the land. I think one reason why clay is so potent today is because we are in the midst of, a planetary crisis about the survival of our species. And I think a lot of us are trying to understand, and in fact, if we can, reimagine our relationship to the land. And clay can actually help us do that. The last point that I'll make is that this project is also centered around decolonizing museum spaces. This was an Indigenous-led project. An advisory council of Indigenous kind of arts folks led the selection process. So I think we can also be thinking about what is the role of curators actually and institutions within sort of the sets of questions that are being presented. So I'll stop there.
Thanks so much, Sequoia. And I think for all of our speakers, in terms of bringing together, I think that there are points of connection. I think that I can see, and I think you can see, that there are points where there is absolute overlap, and the material is key to that, isn't it? And it faces so many directions because we are of it, but it is forming us also. And I think that a question that I'd like to lead with, unless I'm stepping into a space where you may have questions for each other, but maybe if I kick off with this question, then I can hand back to you if you have questions of each other from this point. And because of the clunky Zoom-like nature of this, it's going to be more like a classroom, I'm afraid. But I'm very curious for all of you who have, Susan, you spoke about 13 years of study of getting to this point. As curators, I think there's a really interesting barrier that needs dissolving rapidly in our understanding and I'm speaking as an artist, of understanding how we communicate and why we communicate. And there are these different points. There's a venue, let's say that's a museum. There's a curator who is envisioning a dialogue, and that obviously happens through the arts in this conversation. And then there's the artists, and as much as Susan, you've been looking at artists for 13 years, then it's usually the accumulation of a lot of years of an artist's work that join in this moment. And I do truly believe that that is a joining moment. Your description of putting together the exhibition at MoCA is a really, really difficult endeavor, because you are including, you are growing, and you can see the potential for much more work there. And I think that to eventually get to my question, I'm very, very curious in this moment in time, does this moment of clay form our inform and create our future artists? Or is clay molding us, or are we molding clay? And of course, that's got loads of human exceptionalism problems around that question. But I think it's one where I'm curious about where this moment takes us, which is probably ginormous. But Susan, do you see artists seeing your exhibition and thinking clay is a good idea?
Gosh, there were so many ideas in that, Claire, but so I'll try to address some of them. But yes, artists, I mean, I'm always particularly thrilled when artists say they are interested or intrigued or engaged with my exhibitions. And there certainly have been a lot of that, including a lot of artists who work with clay, which I feel like that if they embrace this, I'm thrilled. But it's also MoCA has a very wide audience, and a very knowledgeable audience, but also people who might be coming to a museum for the first time, and they might have expected a pot, and what they're seeing is so much different. So I think the fact that clay is getting more and more platforms as more people embrace it, I think that just more people are going to understand it. And I mean, 13 years of study, you give me too much credit. I mean, I've been looking and paying attention, and I grew up in a neighborhood with a lot of studio potters. Like a lot of my friends' mothers were, real working potters, and it wasn't unusual to have a kiln in the back, but it's, the education to catch up with what I should learn about clay, it's going to take a long time. But in fact, I think that I had an interesting leg up, in fact, doing this show of bringing together artists who weren't trained in ceramics with those who were, because I'm a bit of an outsider and I'm breaking some rules. And just to circle back, I think that this is a moment that also reflects craft being embraced on many levels. Even in my show, there's nail art incorporated, there's metalworking, there's reference to quilt making, to furniture design. I think that we're all embracing different modes of making, and ones that are perhaps pushing back against technology, but I've put in a lot of other threads, but I'll let other people speak. But
yeah, and I think that that idea of craft and that's a huge question. But before that, I'm going to slide over to Jareh, and it's really that question of whether this clay moment influences others in the future. And I think that it's really interesting when you said, what kind of objects came out of Abuja? Like what kind of objects are going to come out of body vessel clay? It's kind of you're starting a conversation for others, right?
Yeah, I mean, sorry, I'm just trying to keep track of the questions. But I guess, I mean, the show was also doing different things. It was a part of history that, from a sort of curatorial position, I didn't think that there was enough that we knew about it in terms of like this legacy of Kwali, as I mentioned, or to a broader audience. Maybe I should save that to a broader audience who don't know her or haven't heard of her before, sort of introduction or reintroduction into an aspect of her legacy that perhaps wasn't so prominent. So, there was that going on, because I guess like one of the questions that did come up as well through this research was, I would keep being asked within the art world or wherever, do I know of any artists who are like directly or have been directly influenced by Kwali, a younger generation? And the artists that were familiar with her, where, there was this line of, if they were sort of influenced or looking closely at Magdalena Dondo, they would have engaged with Ladi Kwali, but others just, didn't know who she was. And I wasn't trying to sort of create this, I guess, like direct passing down, but there was this connection between some of the artists who were looking to these matrilineal traditions, and what does it mean when you have a tradition that is passed down through a familial line, through a woman in that family, and then there are a younger generation look into these histories to sort of rethink the way, or sort of be inspired by that legacy to think about how they make work. And I'm trying to go back to the question of sort of thinking about, I guess like my interests have always been interdisciplinary. I'm very much my specialism is in performance arts, and I'm sort of engaging with history through that lens of performance, through these qualities in making, in sort of processual work. These things interest me. And, you know, what does it mean to sort of really probe through histories, through the performative, and sort of engagement making that way. And so that, you know, that's very much what this contemporary display, you know, the artists that I selected, they're not just working with ceramics or clay, they're very, very much working across different media and field. And a lot of contemporary artists, you know, work in that way. Clay is something that has been taken up as part of wider practice. And that was really interesting to me, actually, and I thought worth raising about, you know, the future of this area, really.
Yeah, I think the enabling of wider practice is a really leading point for all of the conversations you've raised today through your practice. You know, the idea that Susan mentioned, that artists were having the possibility to make works at scale that they hadn't had the opportunity before. It's the possibility for the clay and the artist to talk, and you know, really less to do with the specialisms, but more to do with the material possibilities. And I suppose that, Sequoia, if I can kind of head that vague question over to you about, you know, is this moment in clay forming a new generation of makers? And I think that is, you know, very clear that the Indigenous question is important in that.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, so much to respond to. I would say yes, absolutely. The current moment is informing artist thinking. We just a few weeks ago closed an exhibition by the Canadian artist Sherry Boyle, who is a multidisciplinary artist who works with ceramics within a broader practice that has performance and sculpture and two-dimensional work incorporated. And one of the amazing aspects of kind of having the show on view for a few months here was in fact seeing how younger artists, even like high school age artists, were engaging with the work so substantially. It was really actually restorative for me as a curator in some ways to just see how deeply people were willing to go into some of the really tough questions that Sherry Boyle was raising in her work. I think that we as cultures are now sort of able to see clay in a different way. I think that's sort of part of this shift that I think Susan has spoken to over the last 10 or 12 years in particular, and that there's a growing ability, a growing literacy with clay and ceramics, that people are actually able to perceive this work like Lottie Qualley that's been there. You know, it's been there for a number of years, but we can see it now. I love Susan's reference to like everyone's mother was a potter and there were kilns in the backyard, because I think that's so true for so many people. And I'm thinking also of the pots that were at MoCA by Jim Terrell recently. And there's this really like continuous vein of you know, well-established artists, often men, often sort of conceptually driven, not associated with a particular kind of medium, who kind of physical material, who have this, you know, this passion for clay. And I think that we have been willing to overlook that for a long time, but we're now starting to acknowledge and see that more. And it came up in that project. Solid Wit also has this like crazy, you know, lots of Solid Wit at MoCA has this like crazy long-standing interest in ceramics as well. I think also I'd love to follow up on the point of lineage that Jareh brought up in terms of Lottie Qualley. And of course, Simone Lee is the American artist who comes to mind most profoundly in that. And this notion of, as ceramic artists, sort of finding lineage and claiming lineage and sort of putting ourselves within a particular lineage as an act of formation and self-formation and understanding. So maybe I'll bump a question to Jareh, if I could, about thinking about sort of Simone Lee, or maybe Lottie Qualley's kind of wider influence outside of the British context in particular.
I mean, this exhibition was also a real opportunity to, I guess, spark that as well. I am aware that Lottie Qualley is an influence on Simone Lee. She has, you know, reference sort of cited her as being inspirational to her. So I guess I was also thinking of that, what if we can sort of like introduce La Quali to a younger generation, actually. And also it's something, I mean, I didn't speak about it during the presentation. It was one of the contemporary artists who is part of the exhibition, Priscilla Noha, was very much doing that. She was looking specifically, a whole range of traditions, but specifically looking at African women potters, Kouame Kaha, from Ivory Coast. She traveled to Morocco and spent time with the elder potter in the Rift Mountain regions, Mama Aisha, and just really sort of, and I was very inspired by Priscilla's work, which, I mean, everything she responded to those legacy and created new works. She was engaging and writing about this as a research project. And then that came into the exhibition as a sort of direct response to those legacies in terms of how she's sort of creating works that are dealing with hand building and throwing at the wheel and creating this figurative sculptural ceramics objects, and really sort of exploring sort of evolution of the vessel as well. And perhaps in presenting this exhibition, just really thinking about the way maybe these legacies can then inspire and speak to the present and beyond, really. So that was, that's certainly something that I had in mind, and it's certainly something that I guess, in time we'll sort of see how that trajectory develops, really.
I wanted to add something about the importance of that lineage too, going into the past and more present. In the Mass MoCA show, there are two generations, and so there are actual artists who were students of other artists in the show. I mean, one example is Rose B. Simpson was Linda Sormin's student, and Rose also references her own mother, who's a well-known ceramic artist. And even in the exhibition, there's, I don't know if you remember from the scrolling of the images, behind Rose's three figures called Countdown, there's an image of a car, which is an image here, but it's an actual sculpture, and it's named Maria, and it's a reference to Maria Martinez and that direct lineage. They're both Tewa artists. So a lot of the artists, I can give more examples. I mean, Khalil Robert Irving is also referencing the lineage in his use of clay to St. Louis and the mining of clay there. So it's right in a lot of the work, which is exciting, because I think that may have been missing. A lot of the students who come to Mass MoCA do say, I didn't know about this artist or that artist. When they learn about artists, they're sort of a smaller group. So it's nice that we're all kind of exploding that and expanding that out with these exhibitions and scholarship.
And I think that offers us a huge richness. It's there's something about the richness of those kinds of dialogues, the way those generational interactions become less part of the academy and more part of a narrative that's generated through those experiences. I'm very aware that we are zooming through time, and I wonder whether, Linda, you wanted to pick up on any of the questions that are coming through. We have some great questions, and if it's okay to start to direct you from what some of our attendees are keen to talk to you about. We may not get to it all in the next 13 minutes, but we can have a go.
Sure, I'd be happy to read the questions coming in. Thanks to those of you who are sending them in. One question is, I'd love any of your thoughts to the question, where does the power lie in clay and contemporary ceramics practice in retelling difficult and complex histories or stories for audience today? Thank you. And that's addressing all the panelists.
I can jump in on this one. So where is the power in clay? So a few things come to mind right away. One is clay is a healing medium, and it might sound a little new agey or whatever, but I do actually believe that there is this kind of healing restorative aspect to both the physical interaction with the material, so as the artist or maker, and then also as the engagement with the material. I think that these questions of lineage also speak to clay's sort of necessary tie to the past in a sense. And I think that for years, this was a liability in a way, and particularly in a contemporary kind of mainstream art context. And now it's become an asset because it is this inescapability of clay, the kind of ubiquity of clay, and the kind of this, human connection to the kind of body of clay and the body of the planet is sort of is prevented on some level, I think, clay from really functioning very well as a kind of Kantian autonomous sort of Western art object, but it works incredibly well for us, understanding our kind of place on the planet. And the last thought around kind of what makes clay powerful now is that it has a logic to it. And I feel like clay is not just a medium, like a physical medium, but it's also a way of thinking. It's a way of understanding yourself in the world.
There's a really lovely quote from Magdalena Dundo referencing that working with a material rather than imposing your systems upon it, which we all do in some way, but actually that shared dialogue with the material, Sequoia. But I interrupted the panelists, sorry.
Yeah, if anyone has more thoughts to share on that.
I was just going to respond to what Sequoia said about thinking through the medium. It reminds me of some earlier debates about, craft versus conceptual work. And it's just those two things meld so well with clay because of what Sequoia said, that the conceptual is embedded right in the material and not just applied to it, if that makes sense.
Dr. Jareh?
Yeah, I mean, I guess my mind was really just, I guess it's just really thinking of this idea of just sort of, I'm just really thinking prominently of one of the works in the exhibition, Body Vessel Clay, which responds directly, I guess, through this diasporic lens, just thinking about the landscape of where someone comes from. So Chinasa Vivian Azuga, clay for her was really something connected to the landscape of the eastern part of Nigeria, and a place that she was reconnecting to due to loss, traveling back and going back to perform these funerary rites, and just that being a really sort of potent symbol of a diaspora connecting back to the land from which one is detached from, and just thinking about those movements, migratory movements. So that's sort of where I'm at with that question, actually, this sort of, I guess, reconnection back to the land itself, and one's roots, and how clay perhaps is the material that does that actually in a really visceral way.
That was so powerful in the exhibition. I could feel that sense of place. And it leads us into this question also related to this. Clay being a direct link to earth-based practices and the body as a form of material culture, do you feel embodied and somatic practices in clay are pushing the performative inquiry with artists globally as a way to unpack the deep ecological crisis we are experiencing individually and collectively? And that comes from Gail Mann.
I mean, I guess I could sort of speak a little bit on that question. I'm just really thinking about, this idea around like performance in clay, specifically to a particular work again. Just really thinking about Jade Montserrat's piece in the exhibition, where the artist returns to a rural landscape in Yorkshire, where she grew up. Actually, it's a site really close to where she grew up. I'm thinking about these questions around just who owns the British countryside, actually, and the legacies of slavery that built that landscape, the absence of Black bodies in that landscape historically, and what it means to sort of intervene within the landscape. She creates a piece where she digs a hole with her hands. It's a performance to camera. She's also thinking about the kinds of things that she did growing up for leisure, playing with clay wall building, creating these imaginary worlds, but then returning as an adult and sort of creating this direct action in a landscape that is so weighted and contested. And then just, I guess, more politically, just thinking of the ways that as humans, we extract from the earth, we sort of gorge the earth, and just the complete disregard for just the extraction of other things from the landscape without sort of a level of care towards it as well, actually. So yeah, those are just some thoughts on that. I'm not sure if I answer that directly.
Definitely.
So, and I might respond with that to talking about Linda's piece, but at Mass MoCA. But since you're here, Linda, I mean, thinking about the diasporic through clay and also the intimate relationship with the land. Your piece is called Stream, and it's about you walking through a stream in Thailand and how you replicate that and mirror it with memories of walking in Alfred. I don't know. I mean, I don't want to speak for you, but these themes are so relevant to your work. I don't know if you'd want to say a few words instead of me speaking for you.
Oh, I appreciate that. I really want to focus on your thoughts as the panel and just ask the questions, but I definitely, what Dr. Jareh Das was talking about, it's that visceral embodiment of place and the meanings that come from place. It's never devoid of connections with our identities and the ways that we move through the world or are forced to move from place to place. And so those are very present in that way of moving through the installation. Dr. Sequoia Miller?
Thanks, Linda. Yeah, I think that sort of the ecological kind of crisis is at the center of many people's work, and it can be the extent to which the earth is sort of literal or metaphorical. There's kind of a continuum there. I feel like with Talking Earth, the project here at the Gardiner, this, it takes on both of those dimensions. Clearly, I think that clay is becoming a tool for us to reimagine our relationship to the planet, actually, because I think we're recognizing that the kind of global capitalist way that we have of understanding the planet isn't going to keep working for us. So we need some tools for developing a new relationship, and squeezing clay is a great place to start.
Related to that, also, a number of the artists in the exhibition at Mass MoCA really tackle capitalism in an interesting way by reusing previous work. And so instead of like producing new objects, many of them, Nicole Cherubini example, Linda another, reuse old work. And so it's sort of creating new objects out of old and not adding something else, to the landscape and another, I don't want to call art a commodity, but another thing, which I think is an important part of a lot of people's practices.
And Linda, I don't know whether we have time to address any more of the questions. We have a raft of questions ahead of us. Some we have covered in some ways. Do you think there's anything there we can touch on quickly, or?
There's a flood of questions right now. So if anyone on the panel, if anyone sees anything that they'd like to, let me just go through.
I see a question that I want to just respond to. It says, if clay is intrinsically related to the past, and can it also be linked to the future? And I would say, just thinking specifically of the show at Mass MoCA, all of the artists really are thinking about the past in order to craft a vision of a new future and new ways of being. And so, yes, that's a resounding yes for me, that it's a language that can push us forward and help us imagine new ways of thinking, being, living.
Absolutely, second that. Yeah.
And I think in terms of an optimistic finishing point, we couldn't have versed that better, Susan, in terms of probably, you know, the rationale for why you have all worked so hard to create your visions, to welcome us into, to challenge us, and to buoy us into what you've just described, the possibilities of unknown futures, but with the richness of this material that will, if we trust it, will take us into what I take away as being this kind of visceral, of the land, of human, of a material telling with us, not us telling it in so many ways. We are coming to close the time that we've had together, and I can't thank you enough for your really thoughtful responses to the provocation and being able to spend time with us today. And that's directed to our speakers, but also to our audience. And I kind of have a final message to our audience. So many people have taken early time, late time, middle of the night time to be with us today. It's weird when you leave these Zoom meetings. So my suggestion to you is that when you hop off or you're pung out of this room, pick up the phone to somebody and talk about what was important in this conversation to you, because you are the 201 people here. You are the people who take this conversation forward, as well as our fantastic curators and research teams. But you know, you're creating that future. So we hope today we've given you the ability and the tools to do that. But thank you so much, and thanks for the support here from NYU. It's been fantastic.
Thank you so much, Claire. And for everyone who sent questions, we've taken screenshots of them, and we look forward to being in dialogue with you beyond.
Thanks so much, everybody. Bye now.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.